My daughter and son-in-law screamed at me, "We're not your servants," while I was still recovering from surgery and couldn't even walk. What I did afterward may surprise you. Stay with me as I share what happened, and if my story speaks to your heart, I'd be grateful if you could support this channel with a like, a share, and a little encouragement along the way. My name is Rose. I'm in my early 60s, and for most of my life, I've been a woman who believed in hard work and sacrifice. I was married once, to a man I loved deeply, but he passed away far too young, leaving me to raise our only daughter, Hazel, on my own. Life wasn't easy after that. I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. There were nights when I went without meals so Hazel could eat. I wore the same old winter coat year after year, while saving up to buy her new one. To me, she was everything. When she wanted to go to college, I sold what little jewelry I had left from my husband. A gold necklace he had given me on our 10th anniversary, gone in a flash at the pawn shop, just so Hazel could afford her books. I told myself it was worth it, because I wanted her to have the kind of future I never could. I stood by her through everything, her studies, her wedding, even helping her and her husband Cody with money when they bought their first home. Hazel seemed grateful at the time, or at least I thought so. She would hug me and say, "Mom, I don't know what I'd do without you." And those words were enough to keep me going, even when I was exhausted. But life has a way of humbling us. A few months ago, I had to undergo major knee surgery. The doctor told me recovery would take weeks, maybe months, and that I shouldn't be living alone during that time. I couldn't walk without help. I couldn't climb stairs. I needed someone to be there just until I got back on my feet. Hazel and Cody offered to let me stay with them. At first, I was relieved. I thought, finally, I don't have to carry everything on my own. My daughter will take care of me the way I took care of her. I packed a small bag, trying not to bring too much so I wouldn't be in the way. I told myself I'd be polite, grateful, and helpful in whatever little ways I could. Still, as I wheeled my suitcase into their house, a part of me felt nervous. I didn't want to be a burden. I kept reminding myself, this is just for a short while. Hazel loves you. Cody will understand. Everything will be fine. I had no idea that the very people I had sacrificed everything for would soon look me in the eye and call me a burden. I had no idea my own daughter would forget what I had done for her, and that my son-in-law's words would cut deeper than any surgery scar ever could. When I first moved into Hazel and Cody's house, I told myself to be as easy as possible. I didn't want them to feel like I was intruding. I carried only the essentials, a few clothes and my medicines, and tried to keep everything neat in the small guest room they offered me. I smiled through the pain in my knee, even when it throbbed at night, and I thanked them over and over for letting me stay. I kept repeating in my mind, this is temporary, just until you can walk again. Don't be a burden. The first few days, I tried my best to be cheerful. Every morning, I'd greet Hazel with a warm, "Good morning, sweetheart," and I'd thank Cody whenever he helped me stand up from the couch. But little things started to feel different. The very first evening, when I asked Cody if he could give me a hand to get to the kitchen, he let out a long sigh before finally standing up. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for me to notice. My heart sank a little, but I brushed it off, telling myself he was just tired from. Hazel, too, began to change in small ways I couldn't quite name at first. When I'd ask if she could bring me a glass of water, she'd say, "In a minute, Mom," and then forget entirely. Once, I reminded her gently, and she rolled her eyes as if I had asked for something enormous instead of a simple glass of water. I swallowed the hurt, telling myself she had a lot on her plate. She worked, she kept the house, and I knew I was adding to her load. Still, I tried to do what I could. I folded laundry from my chair, I kept my room tidy, and I stayed quiet most of the time. But the air in the house started to feel heavy. At night, when I sat alone in the guest room, I sometimes heard their muffled voices through the wall. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught pieces. Cody said things like, "I didn't sign up for this," and Hazel's voice lower, answering, "It's just until she heals." One afternoon, as I was resting on the couch, I heard them in the kitchen. They didn't realize I was awake. Cody muttered, "She asks for help every 5 minutes." Hazel's reply was sharper than I expected. "Well, what do you want me to do? She's my mom. It's not forever." The word stung. Not forever. I knew I wasn't supposed to need them for long, but hearing her say it like that made me feel like a stranger in my own daughter's home. I told myself over and over not to take it to heart. They were young, busy, and maybe stressed. I decided to ignore the sighs, the rolled eyes, the complaints I overheard. I convinced myself that love was still there underneath it all, even if I couldn't see it clearly. After all, I reminded myself, this was Hazel, my only daughter. Surely she wouldn't let me down. One evening, after a long day of struggling to manage on my own, I felt the familiar ache in my knee growing worse. The doctor had told me not to put too much pressure on it, but sometimes I tried anyway, thinking I could manage without asking. That night, though, I couldn't. The pain was sharp, almost unbearable, and I knew I wouldn't make it to the bathroom without someone's support. I called softly at first. Hazel? Sweetheart, can you help me for just a moment? My voice was gentle, almost apologetic. She didn't answer right away, so I called again, a little louder. Finally, Hazel appeared in the doorway. I smiled weakly, hoping not to seem demanding. I just need a little help getting to the bathroom, I said. Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. She crossed her arms and snapped. You're not a child, Mom. You can manage. The word struck me like a slap. For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong. But before I could respond, Cody, sitting in the living room, muttered under his breath, We're not your servants. I froze. My chest tightened, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. They might as well have shouted it, because the words echoed through the room and sank into me like a weight. Here I was, still healing, still unable to stand without support, and the people I had loved and sacrificed everything for were treating me like a nuisance. I didn't argue. I didn't shout back. Instead, I lowered my head, embarrassed, ashamed, and deeply hurt. I whispered, I'm sorry, though I had nothing to be sorry for. Somehow, apologizing felt easier than standing there, broken and unwanted. I turned away, trying to shuffle forward with my walker, each step painful and heavy. As I struggled down that hallway, my mind went back through the years like a film I couldn't stop. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs, one cleaning offices until midnight, the other serving at a diner until my feet ached. I did it all so Hazel could have a decent childhood. I remembered standing in the cold at bus stops, too tired to think, but still smiling when I came home so she wouldn't see my exhaustion. I thought of the day Hazel told me she wanted to go to college, how proud I had been, and how quickly I had sold my husband's wedding gift to me, my gold necklace, to cover her tuition. I remembered writing the last check for her books, my hands shaking because the money was all I had left. And I thought of Cody too. When they were newly married and struggling to buy their first house, it was me who handed them the envelope with money I had saved over the year. I told them, this is your fresh start. I never imagined those same 2 people would now treat me like a burden for simply needing an arm to lean. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed with my leg throbbing, I realized something had cracked between us. It wasn't just about the bathroom or the words they said. It was about the way they saw me now, not as the mother who had given everything, but as a problem they were tired of dealing with. And that realization hurt more than any pain in my knee ever could. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Each morning I woke up in that guest room, trying to convince myself that things would get better, that Hazel and Cody were just adjusting. But the reality became clearer with each passing day. I wasn't seen as family in their home. I was treated like a weight they had been forced to carry. Hazel hardly spoke to me anymore. She rushed through her routines as if I wasn't even there, making her coffee, checking her phone, heading off to work without so much as a good morning. When I tried to start a conversation, she would answer with one-word replies or a distracted hum. It was as though I had become invisible in my own daughter's eyes. Cody, on the other hand, made sure I knew exactly how he felt. He complained loudly, not even trying to lower his voice. Another mouth to feed, he grumbled one evening while clearing his plate. Groceries don't buy themselves. His words hung in the air like poison. I wanted to remind him that I had given them money in the past, that my sacrifices had once helped build the very roof over their heads, but the words caught in my throat. I stayed silent, because I didn't want to give them another reason to resent me. Sometimes they would eat dinner together in the kitchen, and leave me sitting in the living room, forgotten. There were nights when no plate was set aside for me at all. My stomach growled, but I told myself I wasn't that hungry, that maybe I could wait until morning. I hated the feeling of being dependent, of waiting for scraps in a house where I had once felt welcome. The worst moment came on a Saturday evening. Hazel had invited a few of her friends over. I sat quietly in the corner of the living room, trying not to disturb anyone, while laughter and conversation filled the air. At one point, my knee began to ache terribly from sitting too long, and I needed to stand. I looked toward Hazel and said softly, "Sweetheart, could you help me up for just a moment?" Her friends turned to look, and instead of kindness, Hazel snapped loudly, "Mom, not now. Can't you see I'm busy?" The room fell into an awkward silence, her friends exchanging glances. I felt my face burn with shame. I lowered my head, pretending I didn't mind, but inside something broke. When the guests left, I went back to my room and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come, quietly so no one would hear. My daughter, my Hazel, the child I had poured my life into, had embarrassed me in front of strangers as though I were nothing. That night I understood something I had been trying so hard to deny. My own flesh and blood no longer saw me as her mother. To her, I was just a burden, and that realization hollowed me out in a way I cannot put into words. After that humiliating night, I stopped expecting kindness from Hazel or Cody. The tears I shed in my room dried into something harder, something steadier. I told myself that if they saw me as a burden, I would stop giving them the power to crush me. I had been strong before, raising a child alone when the world thought I would fail, and I knew I could be strong again. In the silence of my nights, when I sat alone with only the hum of the house around me, I began to notice little things. Cody was always quick to ask me about my social security check dates. Hazel, too, seemed to hint about household costs. At first, I believed they were just worried about bills, but as the weeks passed, it became clear. They hadn't taken me in because of love or duty. They had expected my money to pad their pockets. My presence was only useful if it came with a deposit. The truth stung worse than their careless words, but it also opened my eyes. One afternoon, when the walls of their house felt too suffocating, I wheeled myself out to the front porch to get some air. That's when I met Linda, the neighbor next door. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a smile that felt like sunlight after weeks of storm. She waved, introduced herself, and before I knew it, she was sitting beside me with 2 cups of tea she had brought over. We talked easily, like old friends. I didn't mean to pour my heart out, but something about her gentleness made me open up. I told her how I felt invisible in my daughter's home, how even the simplest requests turned into argument. Linda listened quietly, nodding, never interrupting. When I finished, she placed her hand over mine and said words I'll never forget. Sometimes family isn't blood, it's who actually shows up for you. Those words settled deep inside me. For years, I had clung to the idea that Hazel was my world, my only family. But maybe love wasn't about who shared your bloodline. Maybe it was about who gave you kindness without expecting anything back. From that day forward, I stopped letting Hazel and Cody's cruelty break me. I became quieter, yes, but not in defeat. I watched them more carefully, listened more closely, and began to plan in silence. I thought about my future, what little I had left of it, and I promised myself I would not leave it in the hands of people who treated me like trash. They thought they were in control of me, that my weakness tied me to their mercy. But deep down, I knew something they didn't. I had survived worse, and I still had choices. Hazel and Cody might see me as nothing more than a check to cash, but I would prove to them that I was stronger than they ever imagined. And when the time came, they would learn just how wrong they had been. Each night, when the house grew quiet and the lights dimmed, I began my own private battle. The pain in my knee was still sharp, but I refused to let it defeat me. I would grip my walker, press my lips together, and slowly pull myself up from the edge of the bed. The floor creaked beneath my weight, but I moved carefully, determined not to wake Hazel or Cody. Step by step, I shuffled back and forth across that small room, whispering encouragement to myself. One more step, Rose. Just one more. I knew if I didn't push myself, I'd never escape the trap I was living in. Every night I grew a little stronger. My balance improved, and though the ache lingered, I could feel my legs slowly remembering their strength. By day I still played the part of the weak, quiet guest, but by night I was working toward freedom. It was during those days of silent recovery that I began to notice things I hadn't before. Hazel and Cody often complained about money, sighing loudly whenever bills came up. "We're barely making it," Cody would grumble, tossing envelopes on the table. Hazel would nod, saying, "It's a good thing Mom helps out with her checks." At first, I thought they truly needed it. I told myself they were struggling and that my social security contributions were keeping us all afloat. But then I saw the truth. One week, they brought home a brand new flat-screen TV, larger than anything they'd ever had before. Another time, Hazel showed off a designer purse to her friends, bragging about how she finally treated herself. And Cody? He came home grinning with the keys to a new car upgrade, one far nicer than the one he already owned. The groceries, meanwhile, grew cheaper and fewer. Some nights, I was left with nothing but crackers and tea, while they sat laughing over takeout in the kitchen. I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that my money wasn't going to bills at all. It was funding their luxuries, their entertainment, their indulgences. I said nothing. I kept my face calm, my tone polite, but inside I was taking note of every betrayal. Each shopping bag, each delivery box, each smug grin as they showed off their new toys, it all etched itself into my memory. I was building a quiet ledger in my heart, recording every moment they chose greed over gratitude. They thought I was blind to it, that my silence meant ignorance. But I saw more than they realized. I saw the way Hazel's eyes lit up at a sale, but darkened when I asked for something as small as a cup of tea. I saw the way Cody's chest swelled with pride over his new gadgets, but how his expression turned sour whenever I shuffled into the room. I held my tongue, but not because I was weak. I held it because I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when all their selfishness would come crashing back to them. And when it did, they would never forget it. The morning of my follow-up appointment, I woke early and sat on the edge of the bed, rehearsing how I would ask Hazel for a ride. It wasn't easy for me to request help anymore. Every sigh, every sharp glance from her and Cody had trained me to keep quiet. But the doctor had stressed how important this appointment was for my recovery, and I couldn't miss it. When Hazel walked past my door with her coffee mug in hand, I called gently, "Hazel, dear, could you take me to the doctor today? It's just one appointment." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set her mug down and called out, "Cody, did you hear that? Mom needs another chauffeur." Cody appeared in the doorway, his expression already sour. "Rose," he said, his tone dripping with annoyance, "we're not your servants. You can figure it out yourself." His voice was sharp and loud, enough to make me flinch. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening on the armrest of the chair. "I can't drive yet," I explained softly. "The doctor needs to check on my knee. It won't take long." But before I could finish, Hazel cut in, her voice mocking. "Mom, you act like you're completely helpless. You're not that weak. If you really wanted to, you'd learn to manage on your own by now." She smirked as though my struggles were some kind of joke. Their words burned through me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, not just from the humiliation, but from the sheer cruelty of it. For a moment, I felt smaller than I had in my entire life. Smaller than when I was a young widow trying to figure out how to feed a child. Smaller than when I sold my most precious belongings to keep Hazel's dreams alive. The room fell silent after that, except for the ticking clock on the wall. Hazel crossed her arms, Cody shook his head, and both of them stared at me as if waiting for me to argue. But I didn't. Instead, I straightened my back as much as my healing body would allow and nodded slowly. "I understand," I said quietly, though the weight of their rejection pressed heavy on me. I turned my gaze away from them, hiding the storm building inside. In that moment, something shifted. The humiliation was still there, but it no longer had the power to break me. It hardened into resolve. I had given them everything, my years, my sacrifices, my love, and this was how they chose to treat me. I knew then that I couldn't keep living at their mercy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I simply decided, right there in that suffocating silence, that their cruelty would no longer define me. If they thought I was weak, they would soon learn otherwise. It was time to act, and when I did, they would never see it coming. After that argument, the house no longer felt like a place where I belonged. Every word Hazel and Cody had thrown at me replayed in my mind, and each time, the sting grew sharper. But instead of drowning in that hurt, I began to think clearly, coldly even. If they saw me as a burden, then I would make sure they never profited from the years I had spent breaking my back for them. One afternoon, when the two of them were out shopping, I picked up the phone and dialed an old, trusted number. "David," I whispered when he answered. My voice wavered, but my decision was firm. David had been my lawyer for years, the one who helped me manage my small savings and the house I had paid off after decades of double shifts. He had always treated me with respect, unlike my own family. "Rose," he said warmly, "it's been a while. What can I do for you?" I hesitated for only a moment before answering. "I need to make changes to my will, and I don't want Hazel to know." There was a pause, then his calm reply. "All right, tell me what you're thinking." And so I told him. Hazel's name would be removed completely. She would inherit nothing. Not the house, not the savings account, not the small investments I had tucked away for the future. Instead, I wanted everything divided between Linda, the kind neighbor who had shown me more compassion in a few cups of tea than Hazel had in years, and a local women's shelter that helped single mothers. I knew what it was like to struggle alone, and I wanted other women to have a chance at something better. David listened without judgment, only asking questions when necessary. "Are you certain, Rose?" he asked gently. "More certain than I've ever been," I said, surprising even myself with the strength in my voice. We arranged to meet quietly at his office within the week, when Hazel and Cody thought I was at physical therapy. Signing those documents felt like shedding chains I had worn for too long. My hand trembled as I put my signature down, but inside I felt lighter. Hazel had always assumed everything I had would one day be hers, as if it were owed to her. Now she would learn otherwise. Back at the house, I carried on as though nothing had changed. I still thanked Hazel when she tossed me a plate of food, still nodded politely when Cody boasted about his purchases. But behind my calm smile, I was making quiet arrangements. I contacted a home care service to prepare for my return to my own house, once I was strong enough. I began sorting through my belongings, piece by piece, deciding what I would take when I left. They thought I was helpless, stuck under their roof and under their thumb. But I was already planning my escape, and more than that, I was planning their lesson. When the time came, Hazel and Cody would realize just how much they had lost, and there would be no turning back. The day finally came when I knew I was ready. My legs were steadier now, the hours of secret practice and the quiet nights paying off. The walker that had once been my lifeline now stood in the corner of the room, untouched. I leaned on my cane, tested my balance, and took a deep breath. Today, I would show Hazel and Cody that I wasn't as helpless as they believed. I waited until evening, when they were both in the living room. Hazel sat scrolling on her phone, and Cody lounged in front of the television, a bag of chips balanced on his stomach. Neither of them even looked up when I entered the room. That was nothing new. By then, I had grown used to being treated like part of the furniture. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had something to prove. Without a word, I placed my hand lightly on the cane and began to walk across the living room floor. The first step was slow, deliberate, but strong. Then another and another. My heart raced with both fear and pride, but my body carried me forward. The sound of the cane tapping against the hardwood finally made Hazel glance up. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering before she masked it with a smirk. "Wow, look at you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Guess you finally figured out how to stand on your own." Cody chuckled, not even bothering to hide his amusement. "About time," he muttered, shaking his head. I ignored their cruelty and kept walking until I reached the far end of the room. Then I turned slowly, facing them with a calm smile. "I wanted you both to see this," I said, my voice steady. "Because tomorrow, I'm moving back to my own home." Hazel immediately scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. You can't live by yourself. You'll be calling me every day to come rescue you." Cody smirked and added, "She'll be back here within a week. And hey, at least she'll still leave you everything when the time comes." They laughed together, as though my announcement were some kind of joke. I let their words wash over me, but inside, I felt stronger than ever. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one depending on them. They were depending on the idea that my life and everything I owned would one day be there. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets they could never guess. "We'll see," I said softly, and then I turned back toward my room to finish packing. They had no idea the truth was already written in legal ink, that their smug laughter would one day echo back at them as nothing but regret. For now, I let them believe what they wanted. Their ignorance was its own kind of punishment, and soon enough, they would understand just how wrong they had been. Months passed quietly after I left Hazel and Cody's house. I moved back into my own home, surrounded by my memories and my independence, and though my days were simple, they were peaceful. My health improved, my spirit grew lighter, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Hazel and Cody didn't visit, not once, but I stopped expecting them to. I knew where I stood in their hearts, and I no longer wished to beg for love that wasn't there. When the day finally came that my life ended, it wasn't with bitterness, it was with peace. My affairs were already in order, every document signed, every wish made clear with David's help. I had no doubt what would follow, and in some way, I almost wished I could watch it unfold. Word of my passing spread quickly, and it didn't take long for Hazel and Cody to arrive at my house, faces full of expectation. They stood tall as though walking into a prize they had already claimed. Cody straightened his shirt as if preparing for a victory lap, and Hazel's lips were curved into a tight smile, the kind people wear when they think fortune is finally theirs. David greeted them at the door with his briefcase in hand, his expression calm and unreadable. He led them into the living room, where papers were neatly arranged on the table. Hazel sat eagerly, her eyes darting over the documents, while Cody leaned back in his chair with the smug air of a man who thought he had already won. David began reading aloud the terms of my will. He spoke clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. As of her final wishes, Rose has chosen to remove Hazel Matthews and Cody Matthews as beneficiaries of her estate. Hazel blinked, stunned, her smile fading instantly. "What? That's a mistake," she said, her voice rising. Cody leaned forward, his jaw tight. "You mean she left everything to us, right?" David shook his head firmly. "No." Rose was very clear. The entirety of her estate, including her home, savings, and assets, will be divided between Linda Collins and the Riverbend Women's Shelter. The room fell silent, except for Hazel's sharp gasp. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. "Linda? That neighbor? And a shelter?" Her voice broke with disbelief. "She had no right." David interrupted smoothly. "She had every right. It was her decision, and it was legally binding." Cody's face turned red, and Hazel sat in shock, her lips trembling. All those years they assumed they would inherit everything, and now they were left with nothing. Not a cent, not a key, only the hollow sound of their own greed echoing back at them. Finally, David unfolded a letter, written in my handwriting, and read it aloud. "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who proves they love you when you can't stand on your own." By the time he finished, Hazel's eyes were glassy, and Cody's smirk had vanished. They left the house that day with empty hands and heavy hearts, while my true legacy lived on with those who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. Do you believe Rose made the right choice by cutting Hazel and Cody out of her will, Or should she have given them another chance to change? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new one is posted.